Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
All about the geopolitics, front and center here, but there are earnings, companies reporting earnings. And one of the companies we want to focus on here is Target, because it goes to the consumer here. Emily Cohn joins us, Consumer Team Leader for Bloomberg News. Target reported some numbers, some better than expected profit for the full year. What'd you learn from the Target, and what's the management saying?
So on management, it's important to remember this is a new CEO, Michael Fidelki's first earnings call. And there's some optimism here. There's an upbeat forecast on the coming year. And he's talking about this improving the store experience and bringing shoppers back with that cheap chic appeal that the stores have definitely lost in recent years. So the stock is responding quite positively.
I love the term cheap chic. I do agree that when I go to Target, I find some quirky finds and I'm like, is this really this cheap? But how does Target plan to differentiate itself from competitors like Walmart and Amazon, especially as consumers remain price sensitive and their spending is shifting towards more essentials and not anymore the random things that I find?
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, what Target used to do really well is you'd go in for some rolls of toilet paper and you'd come out with sweatshirts and sweatpants and fun things that you didn't know you needed. That was that Target appeal. It attracted wealthier clients to Target. That was its advantage over Walmart for many years. It's lost that appeal. A big part of it is partnership. So we heard Fidelki just now speaking about increasing the pace of partnerships. They have a partnership with Roller Rabbit and more to come. That's part of it. Bringing in brands that you know and love into Target at a good price point. They have a partnership with other brands coming out over the course of the year. I think that's part of the way they want to differentiate themselves for sure. Food and beverage we heard about this morning too.
Who do they really compete against day to day, do you think?
I mean, I think it's obviously Walmart and Amazon. I think one of the reasons Target is struggling right now is because they haven't invested as much in grocery as Walmart has. So one of the reasons that Walmart is seeing higher income shoppers come to Walmart increasingly is because they've made their grocery section a lot more appealing. You can find organic there. You can find a lot of fresh products. You go to Target, it's just not there. So I think you're going to increasingly see Target try to get more competitive in the grocery aisles, which would put it up against lots of other grocery companies.
So does Target then plan to expand their food and essential assortments to, I don't know, maybe stabilize traffic? Or do you think it'll double down on more discretionary or style-led categories maybe?
Yeah, I think we'll see a bit of both. I think that they called out beauty and food and beverage this morning as some bright spots, and I think we'd expect to see more of that.
So what's Target saying about their consumer? How's their consumer behaving?
Yeah, I mean, the word of that we're still seeing like very picky consumers who aren't spending as much in the discretionary categories. So I think Target is focusing on what it can do to bring people back. The CEO just said that they're going to be investing in hiring more workers and raising pay. That's pretty key to making the stores more enjoyable to shop in.
Because that's what Alexis Christophers was saying earlier about her Target experience is not enough help on the floor. Is that something that's a shared concern is the company aware of that kind of issue?
It sounded like it. I mean, raising pay is key. I think, they're going to spend $1 billion on making the stores more pleasant. I think they laid off a lot of corporate employees too. Perhaps that investment is going into making the stores better. So yeah, that is a problem. Slow lines, lots of things locked up in cages when you try to...
Don't get Matt Miller started on this stuff.
Oh my gosh, I know. Yeah. So then with a new CEO, any cultural or operational changes that signal that the company is truly turning a page after recent challenges? Because you have probably skeptics saying maybe this is a one-off.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen he's been in the job for a month. We've seen a reshuffling in leadership. We've seen some layoffs. But the company is hosting its investor day later today. So we're hoping to learn more about what that turnaround strategy is and any specifics on new initiatives. How big are these investments in stores? Those are the things we're looking for later today with the event that's kicking off shortly.
Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Intelligence coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
This military conflict in the Mideast cannot be good for logistics, the global supply chain, all that kind of stuff. We learned about this every time there's something wrong in the world. It impacts global trade, which means we need to check in with Lee Klaskow, Senior Transport, Logistics, and Shipping Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Lee, what do you make here of what we're seeing in the Middle East and how it may impact global trade? How are you thinking about it?
Yeah, so I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to put upward pressure on rates because there's now a premium on capacity, especially as it relates to the tanker industry. We've seen tanker rates get close to almost $500,000 a day. That is just being driven by the fact that people want oil; they're going to have to pay to get it, the ripple effect really for my world, because I cover marine shipping, air freight guys, and also the folks here in the U.S., the railroads and trucking companies. The biggest impact is going to be the inflationary aspect and the higher diesel prices. When diesel prices rise significantly, it tends to weigh on margins because there's a lag effect on the fuel surcharges that they charge their customers. So you're going to see margins getting pressed, and also the 1-2 punch from that is going to be if consumers have less discretionary money to spend on goods, that means there's going to be less stuff shipped around. So there's really kind of a ripple effect going on with the events unfolding in the Middle East.
If disruptions persist, do you think we could see supply chain bottlenecks similar to 2021 to 2022? And if so, which sectors do you see will be falling first or will be affected first?
I don't think you're going to see what we saw during the pandemic, because at the end of the day, the biggest impact really is the crude and energy markets. Container liners that are leaving Asia are still going to go to southern California to unload their goods. The only time it's going to become a problem is that if this is really prolonged and just people just don't have the energy to manufacture stuff. But let's hope we don't get there.
What about vessels? With vessels stalled and rerouting around choke points, how sharply are freight and tanker rates going to rise in your view?
My colleague, Ken Lowe out of Singapore, he just put out a note on the Bloomberg terminal earlier today, and he was calling for over $500,000 a day in time charter rates. Again, what it's not so much the diversion, it's the kind of the demand. So people are willing to pay up high. A lot of insurance companies are no longer insuring in the region. So the Strait of Hormuz is pretty much, the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz is pretty much shut down no matter what the Iranians do.
So, Lee, if I'm a FedEx pilot, I'm not flying anywhere near that airspace, so I'm going to fly around it. Isn't that going to raise costs for everybody?
Yeah, and so like the ripple effect, after the ocean markets, probably the air markets are most impacted. A lot of the airspace in the Middle East has been shut down. A lot of commercial flights are no longer going in and out. And what the commercial airlines do is, where we put our luggage, they also take cargo. So that capacity is not available. And it is going to impact FedEx, UPS, and DHL. DHL is more exposed to the Middle East than the other two. But I think right now it's kind of a de minimis impact to UPS and FedEx. The real question is how long does this go for? Is it going to be days, weeks, or months? If it's just going to be weeks, the impact to earnings probably won't be that significant for the FedExes and the UPSs of the world, and slightly more for DHL.
All right.
And then
Yeah,
also, a lot of these businesses, they have freight forwarding businesses as well. And when you have these supply chains disruptions, shippers will lean heavily on the freight forwarders to help them navigate these new situations. So you might see, the freight forwarders also could benefit. They can benefit from A, higher rates, and B, also getting more customs business.
Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Intelligence coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
The U.S.-Israeli war on Iran has entered its fourth day with oil and gas prices surging and the world adjusting to a conflict that President Donald Trump says has no fixed timeline. And now we're seeing other countries in the region being pulled into the conflict with Iranian response hitting a number of countries in the region. Our next guest has 20 years of experience working in the Middle East through various forms of the U.S. government and private practice. Kirsten Fontenrose joins us here, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, joining us via Zoom from Washington, D.C. Kirsten, what do you make of the U.S. action against Iran here, just from your experience in the State Department and other areas?
If the question is, why are we doing this now, or why is the U.S. getting involved, there are two answers. One is that during the talks that people were tracking on the nuclear file, the U.S. team assessed that Iran was not actually making concessions. We heard encouraging things about movement being made, but the reality is what Iran was offering was not to enrich uranium for 3 years. This time period is what the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, told us same time frame it would take Iran to restore their uranium enrichment if no restrictions were placed on it. So the U.S. team said, Iran is just toying with us. This is the same delay diplomacy they've been displaying for several U.S. administrations. This is a problem. Back in D.C., the military and the National Security Council and the president and her team said, when the regime revealed this, that they were not willing to truly make concessions on the nuclear file or on their missile file, even though the U.S. had a massive military buildup on their shores, it caused the U.S. administration to say they intend to build out both programs to the point where the international community would lose any leverage to negotiate with them. They would either build up their nuclear program to the extent that you could no longer safely go after their missile program kinetically, or they would build up their missile program to the extent that it made it too risky to destroy any of their nuclear facilities. So if the current threat on their borders was not enough, nothing would be. And therefore, the time was now or never. The other pressure that was in was the U.S. got signals from Israel that they were going to strike potentially unilaterally because of their own feeling of this being a small window of opportunity and it being an existential threat. The U.S. knew that that would mean that the U.S. would be receiving attacks. Our bases would be on the receiving end because the Iranian regime had made it clear that any strike by Israel would also be considered a strike by the U.S. So combine those, then sprinkle in intelligence that told us that there would be clustered meetings of senior Iranian leadership, almost too good to be true. And you wound up with the recipe for strikes when they happened.
So with Iran signaling readiness for a long war, where does that leave the U.S. when it comes to reshaping their strategy? We have some people saying it'll be 3, 4, 5 weeks.
It's not really a reshaping, however. The U.S. battle plan has been laid, these contingencies have been on the shelf for quite some time. And of course, they've been updated, massively updated. But the intent is to wipe out the military, wipe out the Navy, and prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon and create a pathway for the Iranian people to govern themselves, to decide whether they want that to be someone new or to be levels 3 or 4 down within the regime. It's on them. But this kind of operation to destroy an entire military, an entire Navy, including underwater assets, all the ships, all the bases, any missile facilities, drone facilities, factories, manufacturing, stockpiles, the like, it takes some time. So the US and Israel started with those air defenses that would prevent Iran from being able to guard against these kinds of strikes. And it went then to long range, medium range ballistic missiles, things that would threaten our bases and Israel. And it's moving on then to leadership, to things like the short range ballistic missiles that Iran barely touched in the June war, and is what we're seeing them fire along with drones onto their Gulf neighbors now. So there's kind of a tiered hierarchy of places that were first priority to hit and now moving down. But the US operations won't finish until they hit all of their high value target list. Some of those being individuals, but mostly being regime assets, the ways they exert control.
So, given your experience there, Kirsten, is this something that can be achieved in the space of 4 to 5 weeks, as President Trump was suggesting, or could it go perhaps even longer?
It depends on the state of Iran's air defenses, which right now we assess being pretty low, and then on intelligence, because we know Iran moves things around. So right now, satellite imagery, for instance, is helping our jets that are doing launcher hunting. They're literally scanning the air to look for launchers being moved from the places where they are secretly stored to the places where they are intended to launch, taking them out that way. How many of the stockpiles underground can we reach? Is the leadership on that list moving around? Do we know where they are? So the battle plan is there. It's just whether or not intelligence shifts day to day that lays out whether or not the timeline stays solid or not. It also will depend on some geopolitical factors. How is the economy reacting around the world? What kind of damage is coming to Gulf partners? It's not that things like damage would cut short U.S. operations. In fact, if anything, it would probably speed them up.
What are the odds that Gulf states like Qatar or UAE will be pulled deeper into a direct confrontation, perhaps?
Well, the U.S. may not even want that. These Gulf states have a lot of assets. They have standoff weaponry. They have great air defenses that the U.S. is interoperable with. But you don't want to clutter the airspace. You don't want more situations like we had in Kuwait, where turning on Kuwait's air defenses wound up crashing 3 U.S. fighter jets. So anything would have to be well coordinated. The U.S. has planned the battle plan around those territories and that airspace not being available. So it certainly won't be a message, hey, everybody pitch in when you're ready. All of that would be integrated. The Gulf also tends to have a lot of their air defenses on auto mode. So it expends quite a bit of interceptor stockpile on perhaps one drone and its remnants and the like. So the US would want to say, before you get involved directly in anything offensive, let's really watch your defenses and make sure they're being well strategically expended. And then if we're going to use things like your standoff weapons, let's coordinate targeting. We want to really limit civilian casualties here. That's a big percentage of the planning has gone into how to limit those civilian casualties. But when you look around, even them participating in air defense is a contribution. And now that you have their civilians being hit, they're much more likely to say, we would like to participate on the offensive side. You saw Qatar already take down 2 jet fighters. That's more than just turning on a jammer, for instance. And now that Saudi has had embassies hit in their capital, they're rethinking. The Saudis, prior to any engagement, messaged to the Iranians very clearly, we're not allowing the U.S. to use this as a base for launches. But if you do anything that strikes civilian architecture, we will consider it an act of war, and everything's on the table then. So we could be seeing the Gulf being drawn in.
Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Intelligence coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts, or watch us live on YouTube.
Congressional war power votes aimed at blocking President Donald Trump from further military action in Iran will likely fail. That is the assessment of our next guest, Nathan Dean, Senior Policy Analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. He's down there in D.C. I mean, this is just for show, isn't it, Nathan? I mean, the Congress has given up the whole, war powers thing a long time ago to our U.S. presidency, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is essentially a symbolic vote here. I mean, in order to get this through law, you would have to have both chambers pass it, and you'd have to pass it in a way to get a veto-proof majority, because President Trump would obviously veto this measure. So I think what, Senator Tim Kaine, who is the sponsor of this legislation or this resolution, and he did something very similar to Venezuela, is aiming to do is essentially just put people on record ahead of the U.S. midterms, because current polling suggests that 60% of Americans are not on board with President Trump's strategy in Iran. And, as you can do in an election year, people like to play politics. And so this is something that I think just generally is more so about political aspects as we get closer and closer to November.
But even if passed, resolutions would need a supermajority to override Trump's veto. And so that leaves them with to Paul's point, something largely symbolic. So what is the ideal situation in your view?
Yeah, so there's two reasons why Senator Tim Kaine is pushing this. The first is Congress doesn't like it when presidents start conflicts. And you don't even have to have a Republican president or a Democratic president. You go all the way back, over the last 50, 60 years, Congress doesn't like when president starts conflicts without going for congressional authorization. So this is the first reason. The second reason is that, just going back to my point about politics, all 435 members of the House of Representatives and 1/3 of the Senate are running in November. And this could be a situation where Senator Kaine wants to put people on the record so that if that 60% of the American populace isn't on board with President Trump's Iran strategy grows larger, you can have some very difficult conversations. I mean, this is not going to change President Trump's strategy. When he says that he doesn't need to even think of the polling numbers, he's correct. But, he's also not running on the ticket in November. There are going to be some Republicans, on the other hand, who are looking at this and looking at the chances the Democrats take the House in November. And I'm not going to say they're going to speak in opposition to this, but they certainly would be a little bit more wary, or at least their uneasiness would rise as a result of this vote.
Nathan, realistically, is the Senate up for play here in the midterms?
So right now, the prediction markets have it about a 40% chance that the Democrats are going to take the Senate. And a lot of it hinges on today, specifically what's happening here primary day in Texas. Now, you have two races. You have the Republican race and the Democratic race. On the Republican race, you have Ken Paxton, the Attorney General, who, according to the prediction markets, has an 85% chance of beating the incumbent, Senator John Cornyn. On the Democratic side, a similar number, 82%, suggests that James Tallarico, the moderate Democrat, has a good chance of beating Jasmine Crockett, the progressive. That is the ticket that the Democrats want to see if they have a chance of beating taking the Texas race. But again, I think most people, at least according to the prediction markets here in Washington, are sort of just taking into account as their scenario. The Democrats have a really decent chance of taking the House, about 80 to 85% according to the prediction markets. The Senate is still going to be very difficult despite what happens today.
What's the most likely geopolitical scenario your sources are telling you? Say in the next 30 days, what are they preparing for? Maybe best case or worst case scenarios? Best case depending on the view you're taking.
Yeah, obviously, I think it's the timeline of Iran. I mean, our colleague from Bloomberg Economics, Becca Wasser, has been looking at this. Our colleague Wayne Sanders has been looking at this. And there's this idea, if you look at the prediction markets again, in terms of where this is going to end, Kalshi has a contract here. It essentially says the majority of folks think that this is going to be over this month. That's very different to this idea of the geopolitical risk will continue for months, especially in terms of like the Strait of Hormuz and all that other stuff. So I think that's the number one thing here to keep in mind from the geopolitical perspective. But I would also just say from the U.S. domestic perspective, keep in mind that there's going to be a rush to push legislation out this month and next month because Congress, like I said, is going to really focus on the midterm elections, and that generally stops them from passing legislation.
This is the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live each weekday, 10 a.m. to noon Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.